have to say I do know people who don't and who behave beautifully, and I wish to God I could. I think I just get kind of over tense and nervous. I have spent more than 6 decades appearing in plays and films, pretending to suffer the ridiculous whims of scriptwriters, directors and co-stars. But tonight, there is no script written by someone else, and there is certainly no director hiding in the shadows to tell me I am being too sharp. People often talk about my witty demeanor or my uncompromising standards, as if those are polite euphemisms for being difficult. Let us be entirely precise. I do not suffer fools. I never have, and at this stage of my life, I certainly see no reason to start now. The entertainment industry, along with the broad, chaotic world outside it, is positively brimming with individuals who believe their egos take precedence over competence, decency, and basic manners. Over the course of my career, I have collided with more than my fair share of them. Some of these clashes took place on grand stages under the blinding heat of footlights. Others occurred in damp film trailers, across tense dining tables, or on public sidewalks where strangers feel entitled to treat another human being like a prop. Some of these relationships were repaired by the passage of time or the quiet maturity that comes with age. Others were burnt down to the ground, leaving behind ashes that I have quite happily swept into the bin. Tonight I intend to set the record straight on 5 specific entities that tested my patience to its absolute limit. A theatrical titan who couldn't bear to be outshone, an actor who couldn't stay awake, a film director who mistook cruelty for artistry, a husband whose vices ruined what should have been a life, and a legion of modern adults who seem to genuinely believe I am capable of turning them into household pets. Let us begin. If one works in British theatre long enough, one is bound to cross paths with the giants. Laurence Olivier was, without question, a giant. He was also profoundly, irredeemably competitive. Our battleground was the National Theatre Company back in 1964, during a production of Othello. I played Desdemona, he played the title role. Now, Laurence was an extraordinary actor, but he possessed an ego that required its own postal code. He hated anyone stealing a scene, and he particularly loathed the fact that my comedic timing and speed on stage were catching the audience's attention. He felt threatened. Plain and simple. He did not want a Desdemona who commanded the stage. He wanted a decorative backdrop to his towering tragedy. The tension mounted daily until it culminated in a moment that went far beyond professional disagreement. During a scene where Othello is supposed to strike Desdemona, Laurence did not merely stage slap me. He struck me with such force across the face that I literally saw stars before collapsing onto the stage floor in a complete faint. When I came to, surrounded by terrified stagehands, I looked up at him and thought, so that is how we are playing it. Did we reconcile? In a strictly professional sense, yes, because we were artists, and the work demanded it. We finished the run, and we respected each other's monstrous talents, but the warmth was forever gone. Laurence was a man who wanted total submission from his co-stars, and he quickly learned that slapping me only made me stand taller. In later years, we could sit in the same room and share a polite drink, but I never forgot the physical reality of his insecurity. We made peace with the work, but I never gave him the satisfaction of an apology, nor did I ever pretend that his physical outburst was anything less than pathetic. Richard E. Grant is a man of endless energy, which makes his occasional lapses in stamina all the more unforgivable. Our friction began all the way back in 1993 on the set of Suddenly Last Summer, where his chaotic rhythm collided violently with my preference for discipline. We managed to survive that production, but a quiet, passive-aggressive chill settled between us for decades. Fast forward to the set of Downton Abbey. We were filming an interminable, blisteringly hot dinner scene. The cameras were being reset for the 100th time, the lighting was oppressive, and everyone was exhausted. But we were being paid to be professionals. I looked across the table, and there was Richard, head nodding, eyes closed, sound asleep in the middle of a take. I felt an immediate icy rage. If I, a woman decades his senior, wearing a corset that practically crushed my internal organs, could remain conscious and professional, then Richard certainly had no excuse. I revived an old nickname I had coined for him years earlier, raising my voice just enough for the entire cast and crew to hear. Richard E. Can't. When he jolted awake, terrified, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "If I can stay awake, you should be able to too." Richard and I did eventually find peaceful ground, largely because he had the good sense to laugh at his own absurdity once the embarrassment wore off. He realized that my sharpness was not born out of pure malice, but out of a fierce devotion to the craft. In his own chaotic way, he reached out over the years with affection and humor, and I allowed the frost to thaw. We reconciled because Richard, despite his lapses in alertness, possesses a genuine heart. He accepted his nickname, bore my scolding with grace, and earned back my respect. There are directors who guide, directors who collaborate, and then there are directors who simply bully. Herbert Ross belonged squarely in the third category. When we worked together on the 1978 film California Suite, Ross made it his personal mission to create an atmosphere of pure, unadulterated tension. He was tricky, spiky, jagged, and thoroughly unpleasant to work with. He seemed to operate on the absurd theatrical myth that an actor must be berated and humiliated in order to produce good work. I found his methods despicable. I do not need a director to bark at me like a drill sergeant to understand a scene. I need space, quiet, and basic respect. The set was miserable. I remember sitting in my dressing room, dreading every call to the floor. The only thing that kept me going was a twisted sense of solidarity with my co-stars. When I learned that Ross's relentless toxicity had driven the great Walter Matthau off the set in tears, I realized two things. First, that Herbert Ross was a truly miserable human being, and second, that I would be damned if I let him break me the way he broke others. I absorbed his sharp edges, channeled all my resentment into the performance, and walked away with my second Academy Award. Did I reconcile with Herbert Ross? Absolutely not. Never. I refused to ever grant him the forgiveness he so desperately did not deserve. When interviewed on 60 Minutes years later, I did not spare him or offer polite industry platitudes. I publicly described him as tricky, spiky, and very difficult. Ross gave me an Oscar-winning role, but he did so at the expense of basic human decency. I spent the rest of his life ignoring his existence, content in the knowledge that while his behavior was vile, my work outlived his temper. It is one thing to clash with a colleague or a director for a few months on a film set. It is quite another to live with the enemy in your own home. My marriage to Robert Stevens from 1967 to 1975 was the most exhausting, volatile, and destructive period of my life. Robert was a magnificent actor, but as a husband, he was an absolute catastrophe. His life was ruled by heavy drinking, profound mental health struggles, and a rampant, reckless infidelity that he barely bothered to conceal. For years, I foolishly believed that patience, love, or artistic companionship could save the marriage. I tried to shield our family from the chaos, but the environment was utterly toxic. It was an endless cycle of midnight confrontations, broken promises, and severe emotional turbulence. By the time we finally divorced in 1975, I realized that the relationship was completely hopeless. It wasn't just failing, it was actively destroying everybody involved, including our children. Staying with him would have meant the complete annihilation of my own sanity and self-respect. Reconciliation in a romantic sense was impossible, but over the long decades that followed, we achieved a fragile, distant truce for the sake of our sons. When Robert's health declined significantly later in his life, the anger I had carried for so long gradually mutated into a quiet, sad pity. I never forgot the damage he caused, nor did I ever regret leaving him, but I allowed the bitterest parts of my hatred to die before he did. We did not become friends, we could never be friends after the wreckage of our marriage, but I made peace with the fact that he was a broken man who simply did not know how to love without destroying everything around him. Finally, we arrive at an entity that is not a single person, but a collective force of modern irritation, aggressive adult fans, and relentless autograph hunters. Now, let me be entirely clear. I have always had a fond spot for children who watched Harry Potter. If a 7-year-old looks at me with wide eyes and asks if I can teach them a spell, I find it charming. What I find utterly intolerable are grown adults, particularly aggressive adults, who corner me on public streets, thrusting memorabilia into my face and demanding that I transform into a cat or recite lines on command. The explosive popularity of Harry Potter and Downton Abbey stole something precious from me, the simple ability to walk peacefully in public. I could no longer go to a gallery, enjoy a quiet afternoon at the theatre, or sit in a cafe without someone leaning over my shoulder with a smartphone, demanding a selfie or a signature to sell on the internet. "Are you Minerva McGonagall?" they ask. "No, I am a tired elderly woman trying to buy tea, and I would appreciate it if you stepped out of my personal space." The resolution: have I reconciled with this crowd? Not in the slightest. I refuse to pretend that public exposure excuses rude behavior. I have drawn a hard line in the sand and kept it there. I routinely reject selfie requests from adults, turn my back on professional autograph hounds, and preserve what little privacy I have left with fierce, uncompromising rigidity. If that makes me appear cold or unapproachable to the internet, so be it. My life belongs to me, not to the commercial demands of pop culture fandoms. Looking back across this long, cluttered landscape of feuds, fights and frictions, I am struck by a singular truth. Life is far too short to spend it pretending to like people who bring nothing but toxicity, arrogance, or chaos into your world. Some of the people I have spoken about tonight earned a second chance. Laurence Olivier forced me to sharpen my talents. Richard E. Grant had the humility to apologize. And even Robert Stevens, in all his destructive tragedy, gave me my sons. With them, the wounds eventually stopped bleeding, leaving behind scars that served as quiet lessons in survival. But for the rest, the abusive directors, the entitled strangers, and those who mistake kindness for weakness, I offer no fake sentimentality. Forgiveness is a divine quality, but firm boundaries are a practical necessity. I have no regrets about the bridges I burned, because I only burned the ones that were already rotten. So, to those of you listening tonight, defend your peace. Do not allow the grand egos of others to push you off your stage. Do not tolerate bad manners under the guise of art. And above all else, never be afraid to look a fool in the eye and tell them exactly where to get off. Thank you, and good night.